The wind swept across the endless plains of Dust River Valley, carrying with it the low hum of an approaching storm and the echoes of a land that had seen too much blood, too much sorrow, and too many men who'd tried to tame it. The old saloon creaked in the distance, the horizon burned gold beneath the setting sun, and beside a weathered ranch house stood a young man named Eli, his hat shadowing eyes that had already known loss. He wasn't much older than 20, but his hands were scarred from years of holding reins and fixing fences that never stayed mended. Beside him stood his little sister, Lily, barefoot, with a torn dress and eyes that still held hope no dust could bury. She clutched his arm as the faraway thunder of hooves rolled through the hills. "They're coming again," she whispered. Eli nodded, his jaw tightening. He had heard those hoofbeats before. The Blackthorn Gang, men with no mercy, no law, and no heart. They'd already taken their father's cattle, torched the barn, and promised to come back for what they called the rest of the due. Eli knew what that meant. He had spent nights hiding Lily in the old cellar, praying they'd pass by, praying the world could forget two orphans too stubborn to leave their land. But fate doesn't forget the brave, or the broken. Just as the sun slipped beneath the hills, a lone rider appeared in the distance, a tall man in a dark coat, his horse kicking up trails of dust. He rode like the wind itself feared to touch him, and when he stopped in front of the house, Eli's hand went to the rifle by the door. The man dismounted slowly, tipping his hat. "Name's Colt," he said, voice deep and calm, eyes scanning the horizon. "Your pa was a friend of mine. Heard troubles ridden your way." Eli lowered the rifle slightly but didn't let go. "You're too late," he muttered. "They're already on their way." Colt looked past him to Lily, who hid behind the doorway. "Then we best not waste time," he said. "Get the girls somewhere safe." Eli hesitated, his throat dry. "Sir, if they come," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time, "hide my sister." Colt met his eyes that held the weight of an old soldier who'd buried too many promises, and he simply said, "Son, I don't hide from evil. I end it." The first shots cracked through the dusk like thunderclaps. Colt spun, drawing faster than Eli could blink, sending a bullet through the hat of the man who'd crept from the ridge. "Get her inside," he barked. Eli pulled Lily to the cellar, heart pounding as bullets shattered windows and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Colt stood in the open yard, a lone figure against a dozen riders thundering down the hill. He fired once, twice, every shot finding its mark. The gang scattered for cover, cursing his name, but the cowboy didn't move, didn't hide. He stood tall as rain began to fall, lightning flashing across the wide, merciless sky. Inside, Lily sobbed into Eli's coat. "He'll die," she whispered. "He's just one man." But Eli watched through the crack in the cellar door and saw something in Colt's stance, an unbreakable calm, like he'd already made peace with whatever end might come. The night roared alive with chaos. Bullets tore through wood, horses screamed, and men fell into the mud. Colt moved through the storm like a ghost, silent, relentless, righteous. He fought not for gold or glory but for something far rarer in that wild land, for innocence worth saving. When Eli finally stepped out, gripping his father's old rifle, he saw Colt bleeding, leaning against the porch post, reloading with shaking hands. Eli took his place beside him without a word. "Didn't tell you to come out," Colt muttered. "Didn't need to," Eli replied. Together they fought, side by side, two souls bound by purpose. The final gang rider charged through the rain, screaming, his gun raised, but Colt fired first. The man fell face first into the mud, and silence reclaimed the valley. For a long moment, only the storm spoke. Colt sank to one knee, his hand pressing against his wound. Eli knelt beside him, breathless. "You didn't hide her," he said. Colt smiled faintly, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Didn't plan to." He looked toward the cellar, where Lily's eyes shone with tears and awe. "Your sister's safe. That's all that matters." The storm began to fade, the clouds parting just enough for the moon to cast silver over the broken yard. Eli looked out at the bodies, at the land his father died defending, and something inside him shifted. The fear that had ruled him turned to fire. "You should rest," he told Colt, but the cowboy only shook his head. "Rest comes later. For now, we bury the past." He rose slowly, blood staining his sleeve, and together they began dragging the fallen men toward the field. The air smelled of rain and redemption. When the last grave was dug, Colt turned toward the horizon. "They won't be the last," he said softly. "There's always more men like them. Men who take because they've forgotten what it means to earn." Eli nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Colt looked at him long and hard, seeing not a boy but the making of a man. "You've got your father's fire," he said. "Don't ever let the world put it out." The dawn began to break, painting the sky in pink and gold. Lily came out of hiding, barefoot in the wet grass, and ran to Colt, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Thank you," she whispered. The cowboy's weathered hand rested gently on her head. "Ain't no thanks needed, miss. Just live free and kind." He mounted his horse, tipping his hat one last time. "Keep the fire lit, Eli." And with that, he rode toward the rising sun, leaving behind a boy who'd become a protector, a sister who believed in heroes again, and a land that had found peace. For now. The wind carried his figure into the distance until he was nothing more than a shadow fading into light. And though Eli never saw him again, the legend of the man who didn't hide, who stood to fight when evil came knocking, became the story that would echo through Dust River Valley for generations. Weeks passed after the gunfire faded from Dust River Valley, but the silence that followed was not peace, it was the breath before another storm. Eli worked from dawn till dusk, rebuilding the fences, patching the roof, tending to the cattle that had survived, and teaching Lily to ride again under the open sky. Yet every creak of the windmill, every echo of hooves in the far hills made his heart pound. He knew it wasn't over. Word had spread through the frontier. Blackthorn's gang had fallen, but their leader, Marshal Cade, the man who once wore a lawman's badge before turning outlaw, was still alive. Cade was crueler than any man Eli had ever heard of, and now his fury had a name: revenge. One morning, as the horizon burned gold and the air smelled of dust and danger, a rider came, this one wearing the mark of the ranges. "You Eli Dawson?" the man asked, his horse restless beneath him. "Name's right," Eli said, wiping sweat from his brow. The ranger nodded grimly. "Cade's headed this way. He's bringing men. Says the boy who stood beside Colt is gonna die slow." Lily froze in the doorway, her small hands trembling. Eli looked past the ranger toward the horizon. "Then I reckon I'll be ready." That night, he sat by the fire, holding his father's rifle across his knees, staring at the flames. Lily crept beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think Colt will come back?" Eli didn't answer. He wanted to believe it, but men like Colt lived in the wind. They came when needed and vanished when the dust settled. Still, deep down, he hoped. When dawn came, the valley was quiet, too quiet. The cattle were restless, the birds gone. Then he heard it. Hooves, distant but certain. Eli rose, heart steady. He wasn't the same frightened boy anymore. He'd seen death, felt courage burn inside him like a forge. He turned to Lily. "Go to the cellar, just like before," he said. She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." Eli smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "You'll do what I say, little one. I made Pa a promise, and I'm gonna keep it." She hesitated, then hugged him tightly before disappearing below. The door shut, and the world above went still. The first rider appeared, a scarred man with Cade's black coat behind him. Eli stepped out into the yard, rifle in hand, eyes calm. "You Dawson," the scarred man sneered. Boy who thought he could play cowboy. Eli didn't answer. He just aimed. The man barely had time to blink before Eli's shot hit true. Chaos erupted. A dozen riders charged, bullets slicing through air, dust rising like smoke from hell. Eli moved through the yard with precision born of desperation, firing, reloading, ducking behind barrels and fences. His shoulder burned from a grazing shot, but he didn't falter. Every sound, every heartbeat felt like a lifetime. Then the sound came, one he'd prayed for but hadn't expected, the thunder of a single horse cutting through the storm. Colt, he rode in like a ghost from legend, coat whipping in the wind, guns blazing. "Didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did ya?" he shouted. Eli laughed through the chaos, relief flooding his veins. Together again, they fought like men bound by something deeper than blood, by honor. Cade himself appeared through the smoke, his cold eyes gleaming. "You cost me my men, my name, my land," he snarled. Colt turned his horse toward him. "You cost too many their lives," he said. "This ends here." Cade drew his revolver, faster than lightning, but Colt was faster still. The two fired, one sound, one flash, and Cade's bullet grazed Colt's arm while Colt's shot hit Cade square in the chest. Cade staggered back, disbelief twisting his face before he fell into the dust. The rest of his men fled, leaving only silence. Eli rushed to Colt's side. "You came back," he said breathlessly. Colt smiled weakly, blood staining his shirt. "Told you, son, I don't hide." He glanced toward the cellar door, where Lily now stood crying, her small figure trembling in the morning light. "She safe?" Colt asked. Eli nodded. "Thanks to you." The cowboy took off his hat, letting the sunlight touch his weathered face. "Then I can rest easy." His voice was quiet, his strength fading. Eli's heart twisted. "No," he said, "you'll live. We'll get Doc Hollis, he'll patch you up." But Colt's eyes were already looking beyond the sky, toward something only the brave could see. "Ain't afraid of Dwyan," he whispered. "Just glad it meant something." Eli grasped his hand. "It did. You gave us our lives back." Colt managed a faint smile. "Then don't waste, em." With that, his hand went still, and the wind carried his last breath across the valley. Lily fell to her knees, sobbing, while Eli knelt beside the man who'd become more than a savior. He'd become family. They buried him beneath the lone oak by the ridge, marking his grave with his hat and a single stone carved with the word freedom. The days that followed were heavy with grief but lighter with hope. The valley healed. The ranch stood tall again. And every dawn, Eli rode to that oak tree, tipping his hat to the resting cowboy who'd taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was standing firm when fear comes knocking. Years later, when travelers passed through Dust River, they'd hear stories of a boy who became a man when the devil came riding, of a cowboy who stood when others hid, and of a valley that learned peace from the barrel of justice. Lily grew up strong, her laughter echoing through the same hills that once heard gunfire, and Eli became known as the guardian of Dust River, a name whispered with respect and awe. Yet every night, when the stars stretched endless across the sky, he'd look to the horizon and imagine a shadow riding there, Colt, eternal and untamed. "You didn't hide," he'd whisper into the wind, and somewhere, he liked to believe, the wind whispered back, "Never did."